to moderate this webinar that is really going to present how to minimize Scope 3 emissions. And I hope you will enjoy it. I will remind you that the webinar will last 90 minutes. This webinar is streaming live in YouTube in the IFC Health channel, and the recording will be available afterward. So just a few housekeeping. Our audio participation is not possible, but everyone can participate posting comments using the chat button at the bottom of the Zoom window. IFC colleagues are monitoring the chat throughout the session. We'll try to answer directly the shorter question, but we are more than happy to discuss more strategic question after the presentation. Please, when you are posting some comments or question, we would appreciate if you could state your name and the organization you are representing. In terms of language, the conversation will be held in English, but we have a translation in Portuguese and Spanish, so you can access them clicking the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can switch language at any time. And at the very end of the webinar, you will be asked to answer a short survey, and we will be very thankful if you could answer. It's very short, it's only 4 questions. It takes less than 5 minutes, but really it will help us adapt and improve future sessions. So please make sure to take a moment to fill in out before closing Zoom. And with that, I am more than happy to introduce our speaker today. We have a very diversified professional joining us, and I am glad to introduce them to you. So first, Mr. Sadesh Sukraj will be speaking. He is the Global Decarbonization Advisor within IFC. Sadesh is key in IFC effort to support decarbonization and to look beyond Scope 1 and 2, supporting our clients to address Scope 3. It will be setting the scene and really taking you through the business case for Scope 3 reduction. Then we are very honored to have a team from Boston Consulting Group. We have Miranda Hadfield, who is a managing director and partner at BCG. She's based in London. She's a specialist in healthcare decarbonization and has led BCG work with the Sustainable Market Initiative Health System Task Force, which is a CEO-level collaboration healthcare organization. She will present the findings in her presentation. And she has worked with several presidency at the World Economic Forum for the climate. Accompanying her, we will be hearing Mustafa Rangwala, who is a managing director and partner at the healthcare practice in BCG India. He leads BCG work for API and formulation companies in India across a variety of topics with a focus on decarbonization and helping companies establish a long-term ESG roadmap. It will present how the company in emerging market can approach decarbonization, including Scope 3. And last but not least, we are very honored to host Dr. Krishna Prasad Chigurapati, who is the chairman and founder and managing director at Granules India. Dr. Prasad is an Indian scientist, an entrepreneur, and the founder of Granules India Limited. Granules is a global pharmaceutical manufacturing company known for pioneering large-scale production of pharmaceutical ingredient and formulation. Dr. Prasad is recognized for his leadership in innovation, and expanding India footprint for medicine. And he is leading the agenda on decarbonization. So we are looking forward to learning more on his leadership in carbon reduction and his bold implementation agenda to create impact. So let's start, and if you will, Sadesh will bring you through why Scope 3 emission is a strong business case for your organization. Thanks.
Thank you, Isabel. Good day to everyone. It's a pleasure to be addressing you, and warm welcome to my fellow panelists. And looking forward to the conversation today, and I hope there's value for all the participants, and you leave here with a few key questions and hopefully a few good ideas on how you can go about tackling Scope 3 emissions. Unfortunately, I'm not in the office today, so Julia is actually going to change the slides for me. So apologies if every time I would stop and ask Julia to go to the next slide. So next slide, Julia. This is the reason we are all here. Everybody, I think, understands the issues associated with Scope 3 emissions. We can put all our efforts into Scope 1 and Scope 2 within the pharmaceutical sector, and it actually won't move the needle. In most cases, Scope 3 represents 90+% of total emissions. So unless we have a concrete plan to address that, we are not going to see this particular industry making positive contributions. And let's not forget the healthcare sector contributes almost 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and the pharmaceutical sector itself contributes more than 2%. To put that in context, that is more than the entire global aviation sector contributes in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So it is a significant single industry contributor, and we have to take the reduction of emissions, Scope 3 emissions, very seriously if the industry wants to progress in terms of its net zero journey. However, with all things, everybody wants to know, what's the business case? Is there really a business case to actually drive this? And I am going to postulate that there is a business case. There are really strong reasons why you should be focusing on reducing your Scope 3 emissions. The first one is reputational. You see that more and more procurement policies are having a low carbon bias or a green bias. And so that puts you in a very strong position if you are reducing your Scope 3 emissions to be preferentially treated in terms of those procurement policies. Obviously, you also have your brand value that is now enhanced. You start winning trust with patients, with clinicians, with regulators, because you're proactively managing your net overall life cycle emissions. Then there's the financial aspects. I will deal with this a little bit more detail during the presentation. But we have seen evidence where companies with strong sustainability targets, strong sustainability strategies actually have superior share price. We see that their strong sustainability strategies are able to unlock new markets and attract lower cost of capital. You're well positioned with good sustainability strategy in terms of green bonds and the pricing associated with them. The same with sustainability linked finance and the various tags. And I'll discuss that a little bit more during my presentation. Obviously, there's an impact on profitability. If you are focused on reducing a Scope 3, you are actually improving your operations, you are reducing waste, and that actually translates into hard net profit gains. Then there's the regulatory environment. This is constantly evolving, and it's always better to be ahead of the curve. Now, most people will look at CBAM and say that doesn't impact the pharmaceutical industry today. That's not technically true. When you look at your value chain, that is actually embedded across in that. The same with EU ETS. And as you start to look, come 2034, these all will collapse into a single scheme in the EU. You start looking at what's happening in Japan and other developed markets, including some of the emerging markets with respect to carbon pricing, carbon taxes. This is going to become a real feature and factor in terms of cost. So I think this actually allows you to be able to be ahead of that curve, to know that when this arrives, your organization is actually ready and potentially can benefit from this due to having a head start in a differentiated position. Julia, if you can change the slide for me. So we looked at listed pharmaceutical companies and focused in on pharmaceutical companies that provide fairly substantial reporting with respect to sustainability data, and looked across the globe. And the results were actually very, very interesting. And I know this is a very busy slide, but I'll try to walk through this to actually highlight that you can achieve the holy grail: higher returns, lower risk. And that's what the data that we have analyzed has showed us in terms of the universe of companies that we analyzed. So we started off looking first, very simply, at pharmaceutical companies that have a strong sustainability strategy, and ones that don't. So if you look at the bottom left, the graph at the bottom left, the bar chart, that's the blue and hopefully the red bar. And immediately you can see the difference between the blue bar and the red bar. Then we started to play around and saying, well, okay, these sustainability companies with strong strategies, if they were SBTi approved, is there any material improvement? And there was. You can see the companies that have very strong sustainability strategies and actually have strong targets associated to net zero. If they were SBTi approved, you can see that there's a slight bump in terms of returns. And this was calculated over a 10-year period, so 2015 to 2025. We then also looked at companies that kind of tried to present a sustainability strategy. And what was interesting, it is very likely that companies that try to present a weak sustainability strategy may get penalized by the market with all the talk around greenwashing. Sometimes if you're just putting stuff out there and doing nothing, the market will recognize that. And that's the orange bar. And that was the one surprise, that the companies with very weak or limited sustainability strategy actually performed worse than companies that had no sustainability strategy. So that was something very, very interesting that came out as we expanded the study. What was interesting was the risk profile associated with the companies. And as you see this, the companies that are SBTi approved, that have strong sustainability strategies, are much more risk resilient. There's better downside protection when the markets turn. There's better upside when the markets are performing well. So if you're a listed company, this actually highlights trends, indicate that if you do have a strong sustainability strategy, your SBTi approved targets, you do get rewarded by the market. And I think that's something to bear in mind, because this is a way to create shareholder value and enhance your brand. And overall, higher share price actually translates into many other benefits, associated benefits for the company. Julia, if we can go to the next slide. Now, very often you will hear people talking about the costs and how expensive this is. But if we take a 2040 timeline, this is not really the case that you see. Almost 60% of your emissions can actually be at near zero cost by 2040. In fact, there are a lot of things that you can do now that are net positive and contribute towards your profitability. It also requires that you start to look at things a little bit differently and maybe reevaluate your value chain, look at your partnerships, assess how you are going through this, start looking at how you do recording, start focusing on data collection internally in the organization, but also into your supply chain. What is it that you can do to actually extract more meaningful data from your supply chain? So the marginal abatement cost curve is very clear that there's a lot of things that you can get done in the short term that actually deliver positive NPV for you and allow other technologies to actually come to you in terms of a cost structure and in terms of a contribution. Julia, if we go to the next slide. So when we look and break down the pharmaceutical industry, there are areas that we can target in very, very quickly. And these are quick wins, and you can start to rethink how you package this and how you go forward. So if we look in terms of contributions towards overall emissions, the purchased goods obviously make a significant contribution and a dent on that. And very often, it is the supply chain associated with this that is not well understood or not well documented, because we're often chasing the lowest cost. And very often the lowest cost comes with the least documentation and the least opportunity to progress and the least opportunity to reduce the carbon footprint from those particular vendors. So if you start looking just at solvents, for example, two of the widely used solvents, acetonitrile, toluene, their footprints are significant, 6.4 kgs CO2 per kg of product that they are utilized. It is a big footprint. How can you go about addressing this? What are the things that you can start to do to try to change this, to create a more positive impact, to reduce the carbon footprint? So, typically these are fossil fuel based, and you would have to start looking at alternative carbon sources, much lower carbon. And then very often you would get the argument that says, if we switch away from fossil fuels, this is going to be much more expensive. And that is not necessarily the case. Today there are some examples within the industry where the product's pricing hasn't changed materially. A good example is Merck's use of bioacetone. And in their production process that utilize bioacetone, they've been able to actually reduce the net price to the customer by 2 to 3%, while substituting out fossil fuel acetone, replacing bioacetone. And it's the value chain impact. I'm not saying that the substitution of the fossil fuel acetone by bioacetone is what drives the reduction. It's the rethinking of the value chain and actually the ability to then place the products and expand the footprint associated with the products, the market, the sales volume that overall allow them, while making this transition, to also have a way to reduce the cost. And there are dozens of similar examples out there where creative thinking, taking a step back, reassessing the value chain, re-understanding what is it that you deliver, how you deliver value, and which markets that you can target and how you can price, that actually improves the profitability overall, even while you're doing what is often viewed as very difficult things. Julia, if we go to the next slide. So the industry also has to rethink collaboration and competition. Where do pharmaceutical companies compete? And where does it make sense for them to collaborate? What do I mean by that? If you start looking at things like packaging, we are trying to encourage the development of bio-based, biodegradable packaging. That's not the essence of where pharmaceutical companies compete. It actually is an area that they should collaborate. And we have a very, very good example out in the marketplace that's over 3 decades old already. When you look at the soda and the soft drink market, most people don't realize that the plant bottle patent is not held by a chemical company. It's actually held by Coca-Cola. And what happened is like-minded companies who were looking to find the alternatives and focused in on how can we create volume. And by aggregating demand, Coca-Cola was able to actually go in, partner with companies that were producing the bio-based monoethylene glycol. They were very smart in the process, by the way. They created lock-in because they were the anchor customer. They locked all the suppliers into long-term, multi-year deals, which meant the secondary users, the Procter & Gamble's, the Heinz, all had to buy their plant bottle from Coca-Cola. So now you have a chemical company that is actually paying a premium, but has built a secondary supply chain to companies that they don't compete with, but are in the same space, to create volume, to reduce the net cost of production of the bio-MEG. And they found themselves in a very positive position for over 20 years, where they paid the higher price, but by setting up the secondary locked-in supply chain, they were able to actually cross-subsidize their own cost. So again, there are ways that you can think about, how do we do this? How do we get this done? And I'll give you an example. Right now, we are looking at a potential supply of bioaromatics for a pharmaceutical company in in this space. But these bioaromatics are potentially going to be delivered at cost parity with today's fossil fuel aromatics. And that is by relooking the supply chain, relooking the primary supplier and the primary business that the supplier is in, and rethinking how to put this. And potentially, if we can develop these type of supply chains, they are much more resilient. They come in at a lower cost to the pharmaceutical company. There are guaranteed offtakes which actually support the producer in terms of long-term investment. And we then have resiliency across a bio-based supply chain. The same, you start looking within your own environment. You start looking at green chemistry, operational efficiency. There are significant improvements that are happening in terms of process today. There are significant efforts to reduce waste for recyclability, reuse. We are seeing the migration from batch processes to continuous processes. You're looking at flow chemistry starting to play bigger and bigger roles. And I'll touch on flow chemistry in a second and to the gains that can be obtained from that. The other is supplier selection. We have to start rethinking how we go about doing procurement. We have to redraft and recreate procurement policies that actually favor vendors who produce low carbon inputs into our supply chain. And that becomes critical. And again, if everybody starts moving in the same direction, it creates critical mass. It gets the economies of scale to bring the cost lower and lower to the point where it becomes very competitive. It requires some first movers. It requires some people to take a risk. But eventually, if you aggregate, the pharmaceutical industry has significant purchasing power, that they can influence their supply chain to produce the right product and to produce products with a low carbon footprint. Yulia, if we go to the next slide. So I was walking through flow chemistry. We've done studies across transitions associated with moving from batch to continuous using process intensification and flow chemistry. And across roughly around a dozen examples, what we have seen is generally the capital cost for this equipment are lower, the operating costs are lower, significant reductions in energy consumption, significant reduction in solvent use. Very often, the process steps are coming down. The footprint, actual footprint associated with the equipment for producing the product or the intermediates is substantially smaller, simply because by driving the process intensification steps, by making this continuous, you are actually increasing the net throughput. And that's why if you look at the space-time yield, you're looking at 100 to 300x in terms of space-time yield. And using AI, the time to market for these continuous processes is constantly coming down, and the ability to deploy these is coming down on a regular basis. So I wanted to set the context, and I'm sure you will hear much more detail from our esteemed panel members who will elaborate on some of the things in greater detail and highlight to you how some of them have went about, how some companies have went about and made these positive changes, highlighting that if done right, you can actually make the reduction of Scope 3 emissions a clear business differentiator, helping your business grow in a more profitable manner. Thank you.
Thanks, Tadesh, and thanks for setting the tone. So I would like maybe to hand the floor to the BCG team, Miranda and Mustafa. Do you want to follow? Thank you very much. And please, everyone, do not be shy about the question, and we will be more than happy to answer them. Thanks. You're on mute, Miranda.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be with you today. So thank you very much for setting the scene. I won't labor too many of these points because this is a little more context for everyone before we dive into tangibly what you can do. I just wanted to open up with making the point that ESG remains a key priority for Big Pharma despite recent headwinds. So you've probably read a lot about regulation rollbacks, especially in the US, in select examples also in Europe. But actually, when we look at how pharma companies are treating ESG, we see really still a strong focus on this as a key differentiator in, for example, procurement decisions, and continuing to be a top-level priority in many of the global pharma companies. Now, why is this? Obviously, the climate health nexus has been established as an important topic by the WHO with a COP focused on health a couple of COPs ago, and it's clear that the impact on climate change on global health is a really serious one. So in the healthcare sector, even more than in many other sectors, climate change is central to how you think about your mission as healthcare companies. Healthcare itself drives about 5% of global emissions. So actually it is more than 2 times the global shipping sector. So it's a really significant contributor. And the result of this is that in several health systems, governments are starting to put pressure to decarbonize inputs to those health systems. So the most famous example of that is probably the NHS in the UK, who has an ambition for net zero across the value chain by 2045. And they've also said that they will not be buying from suppliers after 2027 if those suppliers do not have a credible net zero plan. So that has really pushed the entire health sector to think about how they decarbonize their businesses to comply with that requirement in the UK. But even beyond the UK, we see weighting in many of the European healthcare tenders now towards sustainability. So if you're a supplier into a European health system, you are very likely to need to demonstrate sustainability progress, otherwise you will not be competitive. I think, again, the regulatory push, despite some setbacks, in Europe, it continues to be a factor. So carbon border tax adjustment mechanism is still a present and relevant topic. And there are regulations also on certain materials. You probably know about PFAS regulation and others, which more and more force companies to consider which materials they're putting into products and decarbonizing those products if they are to enter Europe, especially. And all this is really leading to the fact that many of the largest global biopharma companies, no matter where they're operating and no matter where they're sourcing from, still see ESG as a really critical factor, and they are maintaining their ambitious net zero targets. So most of the largest international biopharma companies are setting net zero targets for 2050 or before, and they incorporate action on scope 3, which is where I'm sure many of the companies on this call fit in, because if you're supplying one of those large license holder companies, you are likely to need to decarbonize in line with those objectives. So just to mention that, of course, for the pharma companies that have set these ambitious targets, Scope 3 is driving more than 80% of their total emissions baseline. And so while they've already done a lot to decarbonize their own operations, and hopefully their tier 1 suppliers are also decarbonizing their own operations, it's all about the value chain. It's all about the upstream suppliers. And in order to give us a bit more tangible meat on this bone, I will hand over to Mustafa, who will talk us through where are those emissions concentrated and what actually does it look like to engage that upstream supply chain in decarbonization efforts.
Sure. Thanks, Miranda. So if you look at the distribution of the emissions, and this is similar to the slide which Sadesh had shared earlier. A large part of it is distributed in the raw materials and the processing. Then the next one will be your API, drug substance excipients. Then there is a minimal in drug manufacture and packaging, and the rest is in transport. If I were to summarize all of this, it is fair to say that a significant chunk of the emissions are coming from purchased goods, suppliers. In many cases, and I saw some of the questions, which were addressed on the group, that, many of these are small suppliers, very, very small enterprises, not single manufacturing facility, not very mature in terms of their, capabilities. How do you think about, reducing the emissions and managing the emissions from those kind of suppliers, such that, your own scope 3 emissions therefore are controlled, right? And that is a big focus of trying to reduce this entire scope 3 emissions, because that's the largest source of scope 3 emissions for most companies in this space. Yeah. If you think about, the kind of framework which we use to think about purchase goods and especially the supplier management, what is important to think about is integrating the ESG principles across the entire procurement process. It is a journey. It is not, it cannot be done. It takes a lot of time to, build that capability in the supply chain, in the suppliers, to bring them up to a particular requirement of ESG, and reducing their emissions. The way we have established this journey for many companies is through three phases, right, of transition or transformation, right. The first is just establishing a foundational governance with the suppliers, right, which is establishing what the requirements are, sharing with them a code of conduct that this is our expectations, from the suppliers, having them explicitly sign those expectations, which are not mandatory at this stage. They become mandatory as we go along, the journey. Establishing a procurement policy which is, well established, so that there is, it is well understood by the suppliers as well as the procurement team within the company, what are the principles on which the procurement will be done, and what are the choices and trade-offs will be made, between cost of procurement versus considering sustainability as a key driver of procurement. Having a grievance mechanism, because for the suppliers, when we establish some of these new principles, it is important that they have a place to come back to the company, if they need some inputs or they feel aggrieved. That's one of the most important ones. And the last one is, establishing a framework for risk prioritization within the suppliers which we have. As I mentioned earlier, many of the suppliers are small. To For the company, who is engaging on this journey of reducing scope 3 emissions, it is important to focus efforts on the highest risk as well as the highest value of suppliers which are going to make a lot of difference to the scope 3 emissions. And therefore, having this risk prioritization, looking at high risk as well as high impact suppliers as the first port of call, and then taking the journey on the others, right, which takes care of the foundational governance. As we establish this, the next step is to do a due diligence, and making sure that all the suppliers, especially in the high risk category, are evaluated. We understand what are the gaps, do a proper screening. There are assessments and audits, which are very well established, which we have used. You start with an assessment and audit which is a version 0, right, which is not a full assessment and audit, which you would do almost a 500 checklist kind of an assessment, but this is more a 50 checkpoint and a checklist to start off with the high risk suppliers, which gives you an idea on what exactly is the risk which is there in the system, and that gives you a good assessment of the gaps which you'll need to address and work with the suppliers to establish, right. The other important aspect of this is, looking at local procurement and supplier diversity. If there are alternatives available within the footprint of the plant versus, something which is available, outside, there is a trade-off, saying that while cost is important, the emissions of, just transporting the product to the plant, that also needs to be accounted for in the total cost of that particular raw material, right? And as this is happening, the maturity of the suppliers, the company gets a good idea about, what the maturity of the suppliers are. And then the actions can be taken on how do we help the suppliers to manage that. And that is the next part where we start building performance management for the suppliers, right? And when we look at this, the important part is to have a scorecard. There is a well-established scorecard, which we publish, for many suppliers. Look at, where they are, share it transparently with the suppliers to tell them, where you are on ESG, what the company expects them to improve on the ESG, in each dimension of ESG. And then, the last part is also, while scorecard is one part, recognize some of the better suppliers who are, doing well on this parameter. And there are going to be many, even the smaller companies, have this ambition of, becoming better on ESG. And in parallel, also establish a supplier support program, right? Because for most of the API companies and for many pharma formulation companies also, a lot of the suppliers are going to be, very, very small, single, plant run by, the founder of the company, or, very, very small scale kind of leadership team, very small leadership teams. And they will require a lot of support to improve their compliance on some of the parameters which we want them to improve. So having a team in-house which helps the suppliers, goes to the suppliers, helps them, that is the kind of journey which is needed. And this is a multi-year journey. It's not immediately we can move from point A to point B very quickly. It requires a significant handholding, a significant monitoring, a change in the philosophy of the internal procurement team to consider emissions as an important dimension along with cost. And that's something which we believe goes a long way in reducing scope 3 emissions from our purchase goods.
Thanks, Mustafa. I think it would maybe help the audience if we talk a little bit about what is it that you actually ask your suppliers to do when you are engaging them. And here on this slide, we've just highlighted some of the most important levers that you should be asking your suppliers to pull in their business in order to reduce emissions. It's a little bit linked to what Sudesh was saying earlier, that in roughly 50% of the journey for any supplier to decarbonize should come to them at neutral cost. Of course, it varies by geography. So depending on your access to some of these technologies in different parts of the world, you may experience higher or lower costs of achieving your decarbonization goals. But you should generally, as a rule of thumb, expect that your suppliers will be able to get about 50% of the way to net zero without incurring additional cost, so at neutral cost. Now, what are the key levers that you could be asking for? Firstly, everything to do with efficiency should be on the agenda of your supplier conversations. So you should be asking them for ideas about how to redesign products or packaging so that you reduce the material used. Of course, continuous manufacturing, which Sudesh also touched on, any opportunities for solvent reuse or opportunities to better be routing transportation and supply chain distribution. Then renewable power. This is often a lever that in many markets comes at a cost saving. In some markets, it's a little bit of incremental cost versus fossil power, but I will talk about how to reduce the costs of renewable energy in a minute. But together with efficiency, we see renewable power and efficiency as the two most critical first levers that every company needs to pull. Then, depending on what you are sourcing, there are likely agricultural inputs to the process upstream, which you need to ensure are deforestation free and are as low emissions as possible. Next to that, heat is a really key lever for your suppliers. So you should be asking them as a priority right now to be making investments in lower emissions heat, because that is critical across the full value chain. Some of the levers you see more on the right side are more expensive levers that vary a little more depending on which type of suppliers you're speaking to. So, of course, if you're speaking to logistics providers, you need to make sure that they are using lowest emissions vehicles and that they are sending by sea wherever possible rather than by air. And if you are looking to work with suppliers that are using very high temperature processes or that are, for example, creating carbon capture and storage, or the use of biomethane and some of the more emerging high temperature heat solutions may be appropriate. And or you need to be speaking to them about feedstock switches. So, for example, using bio-based inputs instead of fossil-based inputs to the materials that they provide you. But I think the headline message is, once you've decided which of the key levers is relevant for the suppliers that you're engaging, you need to make sure that they are pulling those easiest and cheapest levers first while preparing for those slightly more expensive levers and making those investments for the long term that will really get them all the way to net zero. Now, hopefully that's given you an overview of how to manage the Scope 3 program and also what to ask your suppliers to do when they come to you asking how they can decarbonize their business. I'm going to give you an example now from the group that I work with, which is the Health Systems Task Force from the Sustainable Markets Initiative. And the value of, I think, this case study is that it's a group of biopharma companies, mostly, you can see them on the right side of this page, that convene at CEO level to set priorities for decarbonizing the whole healthcare value chain. So these pharma companies, which are some of the largest in the world, have come together to tackle Scope 3 emissions, no matter where those Scope 3 emissions are created in the world. And in most cases, their supply chains are located in parts of Asia where decarbonization policies and or technologies are not as available as in Europe. They've made it a real priority to decarbonize, and they are trying to create group solutions that lower the cost for the entire value chain to decarbonize. So actually, for several of the companies on this call, I think some of the solutions they are developing could be very relevant for your business. So maybe one of the first things to highlight is that those task force members, those companies, came together to create joint minimum supplier targets. And the idea is that they have aligned on this set of requirements for suppliers that they are asking their suppliers to try to meet wherever possible, and thereby raising the ambition for the whole sector. So if you're a supplier to one of those businesses, you're likely to have conversations about raising your ambition and asking you to aim to adhere to these targets here. And importantly, these targets are not just about disclosing your Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and setting science-based targets. Those are, of course, things that you should be doing, but you need to go beyond that in order to really demonstrate action. So you would need to be, for example, sourcing at least 80% renewable electricity by 2030. You would need to be showing that you are reducing your process heat emissions by at least 20% by 2030. And broader than that, that you are reducing your impacts in waste, in water, in the use of solvents, and that you are tracking and reducing your impact on broader nature concerns, like ensuring that you have deforestation-free sourcing and that you are respecting biodiversity. These targets also ask that you engage your upstream supply chain. And so those companies within the SMI Health Systems Task Force is hoping that these targets create an impact all the way through the value chain, from the tier 1 suppliers asking the tier 2 suppliers who ask the tier 3 suppliers to up their ambition for environmental protection. Now, there are lots of resources that have been created by this group for suppliers to understand the targets and to be able to take action. So firstly, there are CEO and CPO, that's Chief Procurement Officer, letters to suppliers available, which explain what they're hoping the supply chain will do in response. There have been webinars and conferences with hundreds of suppliers joining around the world. There are toolkits that are available, as well as one-to-one engagements to discuss the progress of key suppliers across the value chain. And those forums to share best practices are very important for the group. But I think this is maybe the most important piece that I wanted to leave you with here today. The SMI Health Systems Task Force companies don't want to just ask suppliers to set targets and take action. They want to really help the suppliers to do so in a cost-effective way. And they've done this by developing, in the first instance, renewable energy projects, which pool the demand of pharma companies and their suppliers to enable better pricing for the procurement of renewable energy, focusing in Asia in the first instance. So these are projects that they have put together in China, where over 2 years, several pharma companies and their suppliers got together to procure now over 400 gigawatt hours of renewable electricity across 8 provinces in China. And by pooling that demand, they have reduced the green premium on that renewable electricity by 80%. This means that the renewable electricity bought through that collaborative program is nearly the same price as fossil power. It is very slightly more expensive, but it is a lot cheaper than those suppliers would have been able to procure that renewable electricity alone. In India, a similar agreement is being signed at the moment. It's a co-investment in a renewable power plant, again, a collaboration between multiple companies. That actually enables more than 20% lifetime savings on energy costs. So this is a cost-saving group procurement with a 1-year payback on the initial investment. So in this case, it has materially reduced the cost of energy versus buying fossil power. So I think there were some questions in the chat about how do I reduce impact if I'm a company based in India? Well, the answer is there are actually mechanisms for you to do that so that it's cheaper than if you were buying fossil power. And this is just one example. There are many others that I'm sure we could discuss together about how to save money while also saving carbon. Beyond these two schemes, the group is also expanding to other Asian countries. So we have schemes in Singapore and Japan now. If you're interested in being involved, please do contact BCG Renewables at bcg.com and we can discuss about how you might be able to participate in this program as well. So thank you very much, everyone. Look forward to answering your questions, I think, at the end of this presentation.
Great. Thanks, Miranda and Mustafa. And it's really very interesting to see your example. Next, we will hear from Granules, and I understand there is a slight change in who is going to present. So let me introduce you to Dr. Sanjay Kumar, who is the president of the European Operations and the Chief Strategy Officer at Granules. And he will present the journey for Granules while Dr. Prasad is still here, and he will be able to answer questions. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Sanjay. I'm not sure Sanjay has logged yet.
I think someone will have to unmute him. He messaged me that someone needs to unmute him because he's joined from his phone.
Okay, maybe I will take this opportunity to remind everybody that we are very looking forward to your question, both on the practical side, but also on any other question that you would have. We are very happy to see that the decarbonization is still a very strong agenda, and we are very sure that you have a lot of questions for us. Okay. Okay, so while we are waiting for Sanjay Kumar, I think we can already see a bit of a pattern. It's not only still a priority, but Scope 3 is key to this agenda of decarbonization. And it's not only key for the industry, but also for the financial stakeholders. Have we been able to locate Sanjay Kumar? Okay, while the team is trying to locate Sanjay, I will go on the few key points that we already have heard so far. So in the value chain, what is key is the upstream part, and especially the raw materials and the processing that can be representing up to 50 to 80%. So the latest presentation showed us that management of the relationship with the suppliers is key, and they have to shift and to include 3 dimensions: the resilience, the responsible, and the strategic alignment. And the idea is really to focus both on high-risk categories, but also on the cheapest option first. So BCG shared with us a framework to have a conversation with suppliers, and I think you will agree that this will be very helpful. And we were very happy to to learn that the Sustainable Market Initiative is not only leading the agenda and sharing resources, but they also participate very concretely to reduce the cost of one of the components of the value chain, which is the energy. And they have been able to reduce in some part of the world by 80% the premium, bringing renewable energy to the same price as the fossil energy. So let's try to hear out Granules.
Isabel, I think the problem is he is still muted, and it seems every time we unmute him, it remutes. So there's a technical issue that needs to be resolved.
Okay. Julia, would you be able to share with Sanjay a speaker link, please?
He's here by speaker link, but I press ask to unmute and nothing happening. Maybe he can try to rejoin.
Isabel?
Yes.
So I have Sanjay on the phone, and I'm going to try this. I'm going to put him on speaker, and hopefully he can talk through this, and you guys can hear. Let me know if you can hear him. Sanjay, it's
good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I apologize for the technical error from my side.
Sorry to hear that. We can hear you very well and loud and clear. So please go on, and welcome to our webinar, Sanjay.
Thank you so much. Apology again, I'll get to the work right side. So if you can upload my slides and go to slide number 2. And what we want to share is our thought process, and our chairman's thought process. The entire Granules sustainability team is on the call. The other two speakers, both Sadesh and Miranda, spoke about the climate policy facing some short-term uncertainty, but the underlying risk signals are absolutely unmistakable for all of us to realize that the climate risk possesses the topmost threat to the humanity survivors, and it features, not surprisingly, amongst the top 3 risks when you consider all the long-term risk that all of us faces. At the same time, the clean technologies continue to scale because they make economic sense. Miranda alluded to this in her speech, and Sadesh also spoke about there is a win-win case for at least 20 to 30% decarbonization when everybody wins. And it's a cost-efficient way to actually decarbonize it. So what it makes sense is the tension between the policy noise that we face today and the technological momentum that defines the context in which the business must now act. And I want to go to the next slide, and I just want to make sure that we hear the greatest scientist, the greatest climate scientist of our time, Johan Rockström, who this month at Davos gave the annual refresh of where the climate is headed, where the Earth's stability systems is headed, and he gave a 5 call very distinctly. What we want to interpret through this is the science of climate science is very clear. Economic prosperity, whether it's us as a citizen or as operating as a businesses, are inseparable from the Earth's system stability. We are clearly now in danger zone, but not yet beyond recovery. If we don't make any steps now, we might actually delve into an irreparable damage from coming back from where it may not be possible for all of us. But what holds importance is the markets will drive the transition, whether it's a CBAM or the PFAS that Julia mentioned. The successes will depend on the businesses who are ready to speed, ready to scale, moving beyond the intent that they all of us and other companies transmit through their commitment and through the minor changes through Scope 1 and Scope 2. And this is the structural shift that how all the businesses must operate. And this is what sets the context for the pharma industry, where I want to go on the next slide. The other two speakers before me have already made a case that healthcare is a major carbon emitting industry. Pharmaceutical is a significant part of that. As per last study done in 2022, the pharma sector is responsible for 260 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. It is growing by 15% each year. And again, through the slides of my previous speaker, 80% is the Scope 3. Pharmaceuticals are energy and material intensive with over 80% emission in the supply chain, and that's where the action needs to happen. If we are serious about decarbonization, Scope 3 is where the real work and the real impact must happen. And with this, if I can go to the next slide, which is actually a contrast between how the pharmaceutical industry is embedded within the supply chain of the fossil fuel industry versus any other industry. Typically, the other industries are dependent primarily for their energy needs, whether it's electricity through the fossil fuel sources or for their heat requirement. The other industry is energy linked fossil fuel. But when it comes to pharmaceutical, roughly 70% of the emission comes from the fossil fuel based feedstocks. And this makes the pharma decarbonization fundamentally a chemistry and a material challenge, not just an energy efficiency or an operation issue or the green transition on energy issue. With this, I'd like to go to the next slide and introduce what we are doing at sustainability, what the sustainability team at Granules, and together with the leadership mandate and everyone involved is doing. We actually see sustainability as a science-led transformation of how medicines are designed, manufactured, and supplied, starting at the molecular level. And Yulia, if you can help me with the next slide, I want to start with a clear statement of fact. Our carbon emission stands at 544,329 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent as of last financial year of measurement, and not surprisingly, Scope 3 dominates. 86% of our total emissions come from Scope 3, and within the Scope 3, the largest part as far as our carbon footprint is concerned, more than 3/4, 77% of it comes from the purchased goods and services. This clearly allows us to prioritize the intervention where they matter, and mostly they are upstream materials, supplier sustainability program, and various processes where the need of the hour is to build on the energy part of the sustainability to the processes part of the sustainability. And with that, I would like to go to the next slide, which actually lay out what are the key levers that we are undertaking across Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Sadesh in his opening note spoke about the carbon emission reduction, which is a cost efficient, and that's no-brainer. That's the efficiency frontier. Energy and material usage has to be redesigned, bit of innovation there, and that could lead to a lot of saving, win-win, as I said. Electrification of the heat, as Miranda mentioned, is another important lever where the companies are making progress, and we have initiated a various work stream as well. Renewable energy adoption remains a key priority for us as a company, either through partnering with the external supplier, and over a long period of time, we are going to have our own captive renewable energy plant with a commitment to 100% renewable electricity, and not 80%, just 80% by 2030, if possible, and if the policy and the government framework allows us to do that. Apart from that, we already have rolled out the supplier sustainability program. More than 80% of suppliers are on board, and we are very proud of the quality of engagement. And one thing that is very clear distinction, that just like our customer up the value chain has been kind of getting us on the board on their sustainability journey, we have percolated that into our suppliers as well. And we can see that more and more sensitivity towards meeting their sustainability goal, starting with a basic task of measuring their carbon footprint, committing themselves, educating themselves to what is the global expectations, greenhouse gas protocol-based measurement of various emissions, signing up on the science-based initiatives, SBTi commitments, and all of that follows. But clearly, beyond the efficiency, beyond the renewable energy adoption, electrification of heat, supplier engagement, we want to focus the most importantly on the green molecules and green chemistry to structurally reduce the scope 3 emission. I want to, in our presentation, highlight the 3 points which is highlighted here. So, chemistry principles, thing that green molecule which we want to produce, and the solvent excipient, where our chairman is very passionate and have committed R&D dollars to it in the money where our mouth is. So with that, I'll go to the next thing of the green chemistry principles. The 2 is enzyme biocatalysis, and the second one again for the from you. So we have been successes with some on enzyme and biocatalysis, which actually leads to a very mild reaction conditions, whether it's a lower temperature or a lower pressure. And not just that, it actually improves the chemistry in terms of greater selectivity, and it's also a good eco-friendly and at times cost-friendly substitute to various other catalysts as an alternate solution. And that's something that we're working on some of the mega projects, some of the major molecule large volume within our organization. The other one technology that we are playing around with is a flow technology, continuous manufacturing, touch and go, as Sadesh put it, faster, very faster and efficient reaction with a very low area footprint, and also some of the hazardous and highly sensitive chemistry can be done within a safe operating boundary. By adopting these bioanalysis and enzyme destruction and transformation and flow chemistry, we are achieving the low carbon fruit. We have made early inroads. A lot of work is done, is being done in the R&D to the manufacturing. This is making sustainability integral to our day-to-day innovations, the chemistry we know in the pharmaceutical. With that, I'd like to introduce the next slide, which is what we call, what chairmen call, is moonshot, something that we have embarked upon that requires partner. I want to do the C0 platform. This is our ambition to medicine need zero power footprint. And you can see next to it. First, the access to 24/7 1C energy has a 2-element source of renewable energy, coupled with a grid-level battery storage solution, most likely the pump hydro, but we are open to other alternate sources. Based on that, what we know in the world is electrolyzer converting it to the green hydrogen. What we are seeing this is not just energy source, but a source of basic hydrogen-based feedstock that gets into ammonia and various other chemicals like nitric acid and methanol, etc. The third part is where the magic lies. Many waste product out of one product value stream becomes an input into the second product value stream. I wish I could show sometime in the future some of the key chemicals that we are working with. This is a proprietary value chain for us today, but sometime in the future we'll definitely open it up. The idea is that we are reimagining medicine through C0. From the carbon-free energy and the storage to green molecules and built-in circularity, the decarbonization is designed into product, and it actually is decoupled from the fossil fuel-based chemical supply chain that we see in the pharmaceutical. I'll give you a glimpse of this in a very schematic manner in the next slide, which is our integrated green energy and green chemical platform. What you see on the left-hand side is the green molecule platform. This is a very well established, being established, a lot of funds flowing into these mega projects on the energy, on the battery storage and electrolyzer. We're getting into green hydrogen ammonia and also in some of the carbon capture technology. What we are using it on a green molecule platform is the chemicals that matters to us. And we do have an R&D being perfected on some of the green chemicals that you see earmarked on the presentation. And we are also working on something which is a hard to abate, and we're looking for a bio-based alternative to that. What essentially C0 platform does is integrates the renewable power, storage, electrolyzer, and green chemicals, and creating a very scalable pathway to the low carbon inputs for the pharmaceutical. With that, I'll go to the third initiative, which is on the finished formulation manufacturing. We focused on the chemical, we focused on the API part of it, but it's also the formulation part of it, the making it into the tablets or any other finished dose formulation, which consumes a lot of not just the energy, but a lot of material, a lot of solvents, a lot of excipient and intermediate, and a great source of carbon footprint. We have put our R&D money, and we have partnered with one of the India's leading pharmaceutical research center at Naipur, Mohali, where in the honor of which we have the center, the Center of Excellence in Sustainable Pharmaceutical Innovation. This is now fully functional after 1.5 and 2 years of hard work, where there are individual projects trying to apply basics, excipients, software process, water efficiency, and it can substitute water. We are working on those. The other is on the packaging material, which is like a biodegradable plastic, and also energy recovery. Making sure we loop in this. With that, I'll go to almost last part of my slide, and I want to summarize this. Our approach is science-based and externally validated through SBTi. Our leadership achievement in C and EcoVadis gives us a lot of confidence in the journey that we have embarked upon, and we have started to record initial and a steady reduction in scope 1 and scope 2 improvement. What matters now is the execution of scope 3 beyond the supplier sustainability program, where we need partnership from customers who's willing to sponsor this project, willing to pay a little premium. Some of the policy environment, whether it's a CBAM or a PFAS, that's another boost to a company like us who have adopted sustainability wholeheartedly. Sustainable energy ecosystem, from the mobility to the molecules, and advisors and finance partners who are partnered on this webinar, such as IFC, to join hands and work collectively. And with that, I'll go to the last slide. That's our purpose. In pharmaceutical industry, we are in a noble industry where healing lives matters, and healing life and healing planet go together. And this is our belief that to access to affordable medicines and responsibility to the planet must advance together. With this, thank you for your patient hearing, and sorry about the technological gap we had, and I hand it over to you. Isabel, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, and thanks for taking us through the presentation. And especially, we appreciate the technological context that you are showing, and how you are able to manage decarbonization along the value chain. We will remind that it's all science-based, and you're working on several fronts, from process innovation to green molecule and to bio-based solvents and XVP. If we look at the question, and if we are trying to learn from all of you, maybe one question is, what did you do as a quick win? Because we all know that to engage an organization, even with a long-term strategy, organization needs quick win. So could you answer the question? Could you give an example of what is the best quick win? And especially for our client in emerging markets, where maybe the maturity of renewable energy are a bit less tangible.
Isabel, if that question is to us, I can take it up and then the other panelists can go. And I will lean on what Sadesh has mentioned, the chart that shows about the cost versus abatement cost versus the impact. I think the low-hanging fruit lies on the scope 1 and 2 front very, very clearly. And by that, I mean not just our scope 1 and 2, but the scope 1 and 2 of our suppliers, which impact our scope 3. Efficiency, the usage of energy, a frugal approach to energy conservation, switching on the efficient motors, electricity, these are quick wins and where the economics make sense alongside the abatement. So that's one front. Renewable energy, wherever applicable and in bits and pieces, it is available at lower cost. I think the companies can best be served by utilizing all of that. A lot of process innovations. Biocatalysis is not an easy win. It requires investment in time and R&D dollar, but the impact can be phenomenal and easier to be done, and it remains in control of the company. So what is happening in the factory inside the boundaries, those are easier to control, easier to influence. But the second level is using the same narrative with our supplier and vendor, partnering with them on the energy efficiency frontier would be the easy one. So I'll stop here and let's hear from the other panelists in their experience what they have seen as a low-hanging fruit and the early wins.
Maybe I can just add a couple of them, right? One, if you're talking about scope 3, what has worked in some context may not work in all contexts is, helping transition the suppliers to renewable energy. Of course, there is a policy framework which exists in India, and many other countries where you could do a captive renewable, but it's not the size of that, you'll have to manage for different suppliers. So they don't have the capacity or the funding. So, there is a support which is needed, but, this has been executed for some of the mid to large kind of suppliers, not the smallest of the suppliers. That is one low hanging fruit, which reduces the emissions significantly. I would say a lot also on the logistics side of things, there are low hanging fruits which do not really touch the product so much, but are low hanging fruits, around, just route optimization, using, green EV buses, for transportation of employees, looking at, how you can use even for material, EV fuel. Or EV electric vehicles. I think those are the low hanging fruits even on the logistics side as well. Miranda, if you have anything.
I would just agree with what you said, Mustafa. I think you need to pull all the levers in terms of efficiency. Yeah. You need to do what you can in terms of renewables, and that is available in pretty much every market of the world. Happy to talk about edge cases with anyone who wants to talk about it. But those are always the key things to do first. Heat electrification is often a positive business case, depending on the temperature that you are aiming for. It does take a little time to implement, but it's a low-hanging fruit from an economics perspective. Maybe just to say, there's often a lot of waste that you can cut out in every aspect of your business. And so you should be doing it anyway for cost reasons, but it's an obvious one to do for sustainability reasons. And that is everything from just looking at the way you manufacture to do you really need to buy as much product as you are doing to make what you're making. Very often when we look at that with pharma companies, we discover there's a lot of waste in the system that in itself will reduce a lot of your scope 3 emissions. So start there.
I think, Isabel, given that this is a conversation about scope 3, maybe to latch on to the things that first Sanjay mentioned. When you look at the MAC, don't only look at what's in your scope, because your supplier, scope 1 and scope 2, is your scope 3. And very often, your supplier is generally from a large scale, especially if it is for the supply of solvents and things like that. So interrogating all the way backwards to what's the cost structure associated in your supply chain will actually help you, because often these suppliers also have obligations beyond the pharmaceutical industry. They have to meet obligations into other sectors where they supply similar products, and they will have a sustainability strategy. So supplier selection again becomes critical. Understanding which of your suppliers have a sustainability and a carbon intensity strategy that matches yours is crucial. That will help you drive a large portion of your scope 3 emissions. I think also understanding, a lot of companies are now using AI. And there are two areas where AI is being utilized. One is the simple scope 1 and scope 2 stuff, where you improve your operations and, single digit type of gains. But now you start using it in terms of your materials and design and process intensification, which directly then impacts your scope 3 emissions. As Sanjay touched on flow chemistry, we are now seeing a rapid uptake in terms of flow chemistry. There are literally now over 50 or 60 different operations that have migrated from batch to flow, which by default has a lower footprint in terms of utilization of solvents and significant reduction in terms of energy and waste. So when you start to couple all of these, partnering in your value chain with companies that have already embraced flow chemistry to produce your inputs becomes a really attractive way to significantly reduce your footprint in a manner that you never actually thought was possible, because very often these companies are producing those intermediates at lower cost than what you're buying. So you actually get the cost benefit, which 2 years ago you never thought you would get from your intermediate supplies. So I think it is very important, as Sanjay has highlighted, to start looking at this maybe a little bit differently than you did 18 or 24 months ago, because the world has evolved, the manner of the supply chain has evolved, the use of AI and process intensification has ramped up the potential benefits that you would get from both your scope 1 and scope 2 aspects of your supply chain.
I can second that, Sadesh, very clearly. Our early wins on scope 3 have been on these frontiers towards the Plus Sustainability Program. And as I said, in the last 24 months, we have started to see the change, a little bit of nudge, a little bit of partnership and coalition formations across the value chain is creating some good momentum on those fronts. But having said that, it will hit a wall beyond the 20%, 30% improvement on scope 1 and 2. The real work then starts on the material and the green molecule front. That's a limited point that I want to make here.
Okay, so we're happy to understand that there is a momentum that is being possible thanks to tech innovation and the reduction of prices. My question, just linked to the previous discussion, was which are the strategies that are working best and which are more effective when you are engaging with your suppliers? How do you incentivize, or what are the mechanisms that really makes the reduction of the suppliers scope 1 and 2 possible? What are the levers that any pharma company should use?
If I can start again, I would partnership the market mechanism, which is like on one extent could be if our customers can put an early premium to espouse the cause of sustainability, to build a scale which then becomes a cost efficient through a sheer magnitude of scale, is a very important one. Earlier, I was speaking about repopulating the same spirit with our vendors and making sure that we will give a preferential treatment and a higher share of wallet to those who are aligned with our climate goals. It is a very strong signal, both from our customer to us and from ourselves to our vendors, is a clear thing. And the early successes, just like ours, is on scope 1 and 2. The similar early meaningful successes on scope 1 and 2 can and are coming from our vendors. So the carrot and stick, promise of a higher share of wallet or an early premium till the technology matures, till the scale builds, is an important economic mechanism that we can all respond to.
Thanks.
So maybe Isabel, now is the time to tout for business for IFC. I think from an IFC perspective, we've been exploring to see how we can help enable the supply chain. And so within the IFC domain, there's a multitude of products that we support the primary, like a granules, for example, but we are also looking at ways in which we can support their supply chain, and especially linked to sustainability. If there are parties in the supply chain that have their own sustainability ambitions, or that we can help actually drive to help our primary client, we tend to find innovative ways to get involved, and if required, find ways to support them financially to drive those gains in terms of sustainability.
Thanks. Yes, and we have a suite of products, and we are more than happy to answer any question outside the webinar. We are almost done, and I would like to give you all the opportunity to really share with us the priority. So our clients are here. We hear question about where I'm starting, how do I measure, what will change next month. So if you would just give a piece of advice to our pharma clients, and we have more than only pharma, we have some hospitals who are also very much interested in our approach. So if you have a word of wisdom based on what you see and what you have done already, what would you recommend to someone who has decided to go and really make some changes, where to start and how to make sure that his organization is moving in the same way?
I think,
so Isabel, if that question is to me, I'm sorry, someone's just
Yes,
speaking.
go ahead, Sanjay.
Yeah, so I will lean on to the wisdom of our chairman, who says that what is going to be sustainable for the world will be the most cost-efficient solution as well in the long run. But in the short run as well, there are an early wins that any organization, through a waste reduction, through the technology adoption, can clearly start charting its way. In terms of a very general prescription based on our experience, we are by no means expert in this domain. But what has worked for us is a clear understanding of where is our emission footprint line. And like any leaf, everything is a concentrate profile. So we identify that there are products which are disproportionately contributing. And within, if you look down the value chain, you know that their sources of very well concentration. Having a measurement to bring these spots across the value chain, two are very easy to look at. Scope 3 is some efforts required. And then you prioritize and you channelize your energy to solve those problems. Learn from an experience outside of your industry where some other industry have adopted these measures already. Pradesh has brought the flow technology. I think this flow technology has been in existence and adopted wholeheartedly by the chemicals, the oil and gas industry, not so much by pharmaceutical. So sometimes the good lessons, good examples may lie outside of your industry, and those should not be overlooked. In the end, again, leading back to what our chairman says, this world has in plenty in the Gandhian thoughts, everything that we require to survive and thrive, but not for our greed. So I think a frugality in our approach, frugality in our uses of materials, frugality in our uses of energy is all a word of wisdom which our forefathers have given. And I think going back to those basics in terms of becoming self-sustainable managing within whatever resources that we have is a case for a business win as well, and is a case for making progress on sustainability as well.
Thanks,
I might
Sanjay.
just say a couple words to those who are coming from hospitals, because as you mentioned, there are a few, I think, from hospitals, and actually the route to decarbonize is slightly different than the one that we've been discussing with pharma companies. Of course, the scope 3 is still a huge proportion of the overall emissions for a hospital, and so everything that we've said about supplier engagement is still holding true, and you need to ensure that your suppliers are decarbonizing, who are basically the pharma companies and medtech companies that we've been discussing. But actually for a hospital, there are some levers I think we've not mentioned yet. So you need to decarbonize your facilities. That means, of course, switching over to renewable energy wherever possible, changing out from natural gas boilers to wherever possible to electrify heat for the buildings. But also you should investigate low flow anesthetics. So anesthetic gases is actually driving a large proportion of hospital-based emissions. So if you're just using standard anesthetics, you need to investigate some of the lower carbon emissions options. And then you should put more focus also on the ambulance fleet, because that is often a driver of your end-to-end emissions that you may not consider. And obviously it's not possible to electrify ambulances in all parts of the world, but I know that those programs are starting up in lots of different markets, not just in Europe. So maybe for those who are looking at hospitals, those are a few things to consider, as well as then thinking about what happens to your waste. In the US and Europe, there are lots of schemes looking at how you can recover material from hospital waste, even hazardous waste, and sterilize, recycle, or even reprocess some equipment that is used in a hospital setting, like in an operation room. That is not applicable in all parts of the world because the infrastructure is not available now to be able to do that. And so a lot of that waste is just incinerated by default in other parts of the world. But I think starting some pilots in that space in your market would be relevant for the sort of longer term decarbonization efforts for a hospital.
Thank you all. I hope I will close the webinar, and I hope the subject has been helpful to you. I would really love to thank our speakers, and first, Dr. Prasad, I know you were not feeling well. Thanks so much for staying for the entire webinar with us. Thanks very much, Sanjay Kumar, for jumping in, and sorry for the technical issue, but I think your message was loud and clear, and we are keeping in mind the frugality message that you delivered upon us. Also, thanks a lot for our BCG partners, Mustafa and Miranda, for sharing with us your incredible and deep understanding of where to look at, how to engage. I think the framework will be very useful to everyone. And last but not least, thanks to all my IFC colleagues, Sadesh, Yana, Yulia, for organizing this webinar. I will remind all our attendees to please fill the survey at the end of this session. It will be very much appreciated, and it will help us understand which subject and how to do more to really answer your question. And with that, I wish you all a very good evening, afternoon, and day. And I'm looking forward to another conversation in the next month. Thanks a lot.